Well, welcome everyone to our special event for National Volunteer Week, our panel discussion entitled Bethesda Project Values in Action. So we're so excited for you to join us today and talk about with some of our esteemed staff members here about how we incorporate the Bethesda Project values and how volunteers assist with that. So just a little bit of background if you didn't already know about Bethesda Project. We've actually been around since 1979 and we operate 15 locations for adults experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia. So this includes emergency shelter and permanent housing, all while providing supportive services. And we serve over 1,000 men and women every year, and we'll hear a little bit more about our programs from our presenters today, our panelists today. I guess I'll introduce myself first too. My name is Jeffrey Isaacson. I'm the Volunteer and Community Engagement Manager at Bethesda Project. And for the first, hi there. And if you're just joining us now, if you want to put your name in the chat and your affiliation with Bethesda Project, and I think the icebreaker today was, since we love our skill-based volunteers, if there was any specific skill or thing you could learn and pick up, what that would be. So our first question for our panelists is if you want to introduce yourself and talk about kind of your background and how you get involved with Bethesda Project. And we have some representatives from kind of our three main programs. So we'll start with our entry-level programs with Stephen.
Hi guys, can you hear me? So yeah, my name's Stephen Kotch. I'm the program coordinator here at my brother's house. It's a safe haven that Bethesda operates. We're located right off of South Street. It's a nice location. I enjoy working here. But yeah, so we specifically serve 20 adult male guests. Safe haven is our technical term. So we work towards more permanent types of housing for our guests. We work with case managers and we refer out to different organizations in the Philly area to get more supportive services for our guys. The guests here need to have some kind of mental health disability or co-occurring disorder, substance abuse, something of that designation. That's kind of the only criteria to be admitted to the program. And then guys are kind of allowed to stay as long as they need to, as long as they're engaging with services and working towards housing. There's no strict timeline on how long these guys can stay here. And that's kind of a little gist of what we do.
I guess following in order, then I will go. I'm Nicole Werner. I am the social services supervisor at Our Brother's Place. Our Brother's Place is the largest site that Bethesda operates. We are a shelter for single adult men. We have capacity for 149 men. I've been here for about a year. Before I was here, I was at North Broad, which is one of our permanent supportive housing sites, and I was there for about a year and a half. At Our Brother's Place, I'll let Tori talk all about the permanent supportive housing. At Our Brother's Place, our goal is to help get the guests into permanent stable housing. So that's what our case managers do. I have a team of 5 case managers right now, and they work with the guests who come through here on helping them, get their documents, secure an income, save, do whatever it is they need to do to help them move out into permanent stable housing.
Great, so then it's my turn. Hi, everybody. My name is Tori Johnson. Great to be here. So I work at Connolly House, which is a permanent supportive housing program, like Nicole mentioned, meaning that the intention is permanent. And people come here directly from shelter or sleeping outside of the streets. So that is one of the requirements. Is we require chronic homelessness status, meaning a person, an individual has to be homeless for a year or longer. There's a couple different ways to kind of divvy that up, but essentially over a year of homelessness is required along with some type of disability. And then in this program specifically, we require a substance use disorder. So this is kind of more of a recovery-based program in the sense that we strongly encourage sobriety, and we kind of take on a little bit of a different angle in the sense that we require substance use disorders to move into this program. What's different about my program is that we're right on 12th and Market Street, kind of like behind the Lowe's Hotel, but we share a building with Project Home, which is another organization that serves our homeless community in Philadelphia. And so we have kind of the pleasure of working together in that way. Bethesda Project operates 2 floors of 8 in this building. So the rest of it is exclusively Project Home. So residents that live here kind of have a dual partnership in the sense where we offer their programming and their case management, and then any sort of landlord or maintenance issues gets directed to Project Home. Luckily for me. So, and then I also actually run a couple other smaller programs that are closer to our Bethesda project office. And those are, one of them is Dominic House, which is like, kind of like, basically just individual apartments, very typical apartments that are considered low income. So, and then we have another house called Mary House, which is kind of more of like a roommate situation, a row home with 4 different individuals that live there. So yeah, I've been here for almost 2 years, so I'm really settled in here.
Awesome, thank you all, and I put it in the chat, but if you do have any questions for our panelists, if you want to put them in the chat, and we'll make sure to address them at the end. So our first big question, we're starting off with a big one, and feel free, anyone, to answer it. There's no specific order we need to go, but why do you think people, I guess, in Philadelphia are experiencing homelessness? Why does Bethesda Project even need to exist?
Capitalism, I guess. That's quite the broad question, but obviously, there's not enough services for the amount of need. And that's sort of like, just in general overall. And that's, so it will be a problem kind of probably inevitably, just in kind of the context of the society that we live in, where we, require people to have money or finances to be able to care for themselves. And so that's a big element of it. So, many of our guests, or maybe mostly all of our guests have, at least in our program, have some type of a disability. Most of our participants are on Social Security. So if a person that's living on Social Security wanted to find subsidized housing in this city, it would be, next to impossible for many people who will never receive that. So unfortunately, people have to go through a path that, sometimes involves shelter or sleeping on the streets to eventually end up at a place that they can stay permanently with the type of income that they have.
Yeah, just to echo that, it's a lot of systemic issues that unfortunately we cannot solve at the level that we work at. Individually, you see a lot of co-occurring things, like Tori said, people with both physical and mental disabilities. Substance use gets tied into that as well. People who have been incarcerated, it's really, really difficult to find a job or find housing if you've been incarcerated, especially for certain offenses like any sex crimes or things like that. Really, really hard to find a job. And so the system is just kind of built to continue to keep people down. As well, Tori mentioned SSI. It's also very hard to build wealth. It's actually impossible to build wealth if you get SSI, because you cannot keep more than $2,000 in your bank account. So even, if you are doing really well and saving consistently and working with the programs, and the programs are working the way they're supposed to and helping you, it's still really hard to build yourself out of kind of that hole.
Yeah, I would totally have to agree with what we just said. I think it comes down to just like a lack of affordable housing. There's not enough options for everybody. But I do think one important point is a lot of the services that we talk about, at least in my opinion, only kick in when you reach that chronic homelessness status. So in some ways, society is saying you have to get to a really terrible point. You have to put yourself through a lot in order to reach the point where these services can kick in for you. So, there's plenty of calls that we get saying, I just lost my job. I might be staying in my car for a few weeks. Is there something that you guys can do? And our answer is technically no. There's nothing that we can do until you are sleeping in your car for another year, and when that happens, things only get worse. So it's a real catch-22 there.
Thanks for highlighting that. So we heard earlier a couple of the panelists mentioned substance abuse and mental health issues. I think there's definitely an idea that everyone experiencing homelessness does experience that. Is that what you find during for the guests or residents at Bethesda Project, or during your experiences?
It's certainly not everyone. Like, every person's experience is different. I will say, as Stephen mentioned, a lot of the, not necessarily for our brother's place, because you don't have to fit really any criteria to be referred here. You just have to be referred. We don't take walk-ins. But a lot of the people that we do work with have been experiencing homelessness for quite some time, and it is difficult to come out of that kind of a situation without, some sort of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, a lot of that. If a person wasn't experiencing that before homelessness puts an unbelievable amount of stress on somebody, especially when, not having like a way to kind of handle that and cope with that, because you are just having to constantly survive every single day and just get through the next hour, the next night, things like that. So it's very, very common, but especially mental health conditions, but everybody's situation is different.
Yeah, and I think Nicole touched on it, that I think there's more discussions that homelessness is becoming in itself a disability, not necessarily, but it's a mental health crisis that people are going through just by being homeless. They might not necessarily enter it with, long-term depression or anything like that, but they're certainly going to experience those symptoms and might come out of homelessness with those conditions.
Yeah, it's always good to avoid like blanket statements when it comes to people who experience homelessness, especially because it really can happen to anybody. And I think, in our positions, we've really seen that there is really not a typical situation when you really get to know people and you learn more about their story. There is not a typical face of this kind of situation. But I would kind of just echo that the whole sentiment that like it is very common for people to use coping mechanisms such as alcohol or drugs to deal with the experience of what it feels like to kind of be forgotten by society, essentially. And like Stephen said, sort of the hoops that you have to jump through in order to actually access help can be a really long road. And essentially those systems were created as a way to kind of ration services that just don't exist, with the guise of sort of helping those most in need. And so that, that's kind of just the root problem, I think. But I think for all of us, we all have ways that we cope with our lives and deal with the stressors that life brings our way. But I think for most of us, what we don't know what it's like is to not have anybody, not have an emergency contact, not have anybody to call when you're down and out. And I think that's the part of the experience that's extremely hard to relate to for most people. And if we can, just imagine how difficult and lonely that might be for a lot of our residents who come in here out of foster care, who just simply don't have anybody. And there are many people in my program who really, don't have anybody but the staff that are here and maybe the connections that they make through here. So that's something that is pretty astonishing when you really, really come to terms with what that reality is for some of these residents that we work with.
I would also add, just to Tori's point about, all of us having coping mechanisms, whether they are the healthiest or not. Oftentimes when people think about people experiencing homelessness and substance abuse, it's looked at differently. Whereas like a lot of people do probably the same things that anyone in shelter would, but the consequences are entirely different. Like one of us could get, really drunk and come home late one night, and we just have to deal with ourselves and how bad we feel ourselves the next morning. Whereas someone in shelter could have the exact same behavior, and the consequences, maybe you miss curfew, or, you can't stay here anymore. And so the behaviors might be the same, but the consequences are really, really different when you don't have that kind of safety net.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess we kind of touched on the next questions, but I was wondering if you could kind of highlight some of the barriers people face in getting housing. I know sometimes there's a sentiment of, well, why can't they just get a place or get a job? So I was wondering if, I know we kind of touched on it, but kind of really highlight what some of those barriers may be, and maybe how, our caseworkers and staff here at Bethesda Project, and ultimately volunteers as well, kind of help assist with that.
I think personally in my work, I find that the biggest barrier, like, of course, there's the big ones such as like legal barriers or just mental health in general. But I do think that the biggest one is just like a resistance over time to help, because they've just seen it go badly so many other times, or if they've had case managers that don't follow through. And finally, when they get to our door, you know, they're hesitant to engage us, and it takes a long time to get through to say, you know, we're just here to help. Whatever way you want to do that, we're happy to, you know, give effort in that direction. And I find that to be the biggest barrier, just building that trust and getting over that resistance to someone who's willing to help.
Yeah, and I think in terms of just like systemic barriers that we were kind of touching on before, like, you know, for people who don't really have like a broader understanding of how that works, like Stephen mentioned, if somebody calls, they're sleeping in their car, there is going to be little to zero resources for somebody in that situation until they reach a certain level of crisis. So a person that loses their job and ends up in their car, you know, they really wouldn't be eligible to even be assessed for a program like mine, or even any kind of like, you know, excuse me, interim resources that could house them in a hotel. Or I know people have heard about that stuff. Those kind of measures that were taken during COVID and stuff were actually pretty unrealistic in the real day-to-day world. But for a lot of people, what they have to have done is like an assessment for housing, which would determine kind of their level of vulnerability, what's referred to as a VI SPDAT. That's basically a point system that people have to kind of take like a test almost about their life, answer traumatizing and triggering questions about their history and about their mental state and all these different things. And basically their combined answers will result in a score. And then that score will determine what level of help and how fast they will be able to receive it. So that's not a perfect system because of course people are always going to be answering questions based on how they think it will serve them the best, and nobody can blame them for that. But that means that there are many individuals that will minimize their situation because they believe that by doing so, they will be housed faster. So if I say I have less issues, then maybe you'll want to give me an apartment sooner because you're not going to know about all these times I was evicted or these times I was, you know, institutionalized or anything like that. But in reality, you know, unfortunately, the worse situation that they're in, the more likely they are to get help. But that being said, a lot of times that can place people in programs that aren't a good fit for them. If they score really high and, you know, in areas with their mental health or well-being, they might be placed in a program that offers too much support or more support than they need, or vice versa. If they minimize it, they might end up in a program that's doesn't have enough support. So it's just very imperfect and very flawed. And sometimes too, it's important to note that people are housed in programs that are not a good fit for them. And if you exit a housing program after being housed, you will basically start back at square one. So if you have a period of time that you were not homeless, meaning you came into a program and you lived there for 2 months and it did not work out for A, B, or C reason, then you are at the back of the line. Unless you are at some way able to get transferred before you exit. If you exit that program, you are completely at the back of the line. You will start over, you will not pass go. And it's a very unfortunate system in that way as well. So, I mean, I could go on about barriers, but I think the main one is really about the system itself, which was created with good intentions, like I said, to try to help people that need it the most. But what I ended up doing was leaving out so many people in the process.
And also just to add to that, you know, even folks who do get through this process, other barriers that we see a lot are, you know, with immigration status, depending on because a lot of places require documents and require, you know, ID, social, birth certificate, and people don't have that. And like I mentioned before, certain criminal offenses, you know, I've had people get matched through the system that's Tori's mentioning, and they haven't done the full background check yet. So this person thinks they have a housing match. We do the interview. And I say, you know, this person's on Megan's Law, and they say, oh, never mind. And that can just be like, go back to what Stephen said about lack of trust is going to be really devastating to think that you have somewhere to go and then it's just kind of pulled out from under you.
That's a good point too. And to also circle back to what you said about sex crimes and arson, you know, like those kinds of things are, you know, almost unhousable in many systems. And unfortunately, our systems that don't really filter that out. So, you know, people do get to this point where they think their problems are solved, and then, you know, the door slammed in their face, unfortunately, because funding and all that stuff. So that's important to note too.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Yeah, a lot of good nuggets to take from that. There's a question in the chat, and I kind of want to move to, this can be a little bit overwhelming and talking about all of these systems, kind of bringing it back to kind of the individual and the people on the call. And kind of one of the questions, usually one of the first questions I get is, oh, if I see somebody on the street experiencing homelessness, what should I do? So I was wondering what your guys' thoughts were on that.
I think, it's up to your own decision-making, whether you want to, offer food or money or anything like that. That's a personal choice. Something you can do if the person is looking for resources is I ask if they want me to call Outreach. Outreach is an organization run to, or as a part of the organization Project Home. They are out on the street and they do take people who are experiencing homelessness on the street and take them to shelters. So I'm just going to give out that number now. If anyone wants to write it down, it is 215-232-1984. Thank you, Jeffrey. So that a lot of times people will say, no, I don't want you to call Outreach. I just want $5, which is fair. And that's your choice. But that is something, if you are more interested in offering actual resources. They're also on Project Home's website. They have something called the Where to Turn guide. It's good to have those. I think they make them in like little card form too, so that depending on what the person is looking for, you can offer some concrete resources.
Yeah, and I would say really just depends. Like you kind of got to use your spidey sense about whether or not somebody wants to be engaged with, and it kind of ask yourself the question like, do you have the time or space right now to go down a rabbit hole of trying to help this person or not? And I do that in my own life, in my personal life. If I come across somebody that's experiencing homelessness in my neighborhood or what have you, it really can just depend on like how I'm perceiving that person's situation at that time, maybe their mental well-being based on how they're behaving. It's important to, not walk into something that isn't going to be well received as well. So.
Yeah, I would say like at the simplest, just treat them like a human being. Like if they want to be acknowledged, if they're looking around, make eye contact, wave, smile. Like those are all okay things to do. But like Tori said, if they don't look like they really want to be engaged at all, then, they don't have anywhere else to go. So we should be mindful of that. They can't escape from anybody's eyes really. So let's give them at least the courtesy of passing by politely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then in terms of helping Bethesda Project more, what are some ways that people could engage with us as an organization? / how have you maybe in your experiences worked with volunteers or anything like that?
I mean, there's so many different things. I can only speak about my program specifically. Like our residents, love to have a meal served by volunteers. Food brought to us is awesome. Obviously our residents are known for really liking bingo. But also too, just like, we get a lot of new residents in. So something that we always need is welcome packs, things to welcome people with, sheets and pillows and things like that can, when people are coming in here out of shelter, off the streets, like things that you or I might want in our new apartment. That's a huge need that we pretty much always have. So I know some people, when they're meaning well and trying to help the community, they'll put together granola bars and socks and things like that. And there's a lot of value in that. But I think what's really was another awesome way to go about it is to give some supplies for people that just exited that situation and are needing some things to kind of feel more stable. So, and I say that from the permanent supportive housing side of things. So it's not quite the same for you too in your program, but just for my program, that's the most helpful.
Yeah, I would definitely say, I always say check in with Jeffrey. Always check in with Jeffrey. He's always, up to date on what kind of needs each site needs. But just specifically for my site, we're always happy to take meals. We're happy to take food. We're happy to take like kitchen utensils, bowls, plates. But definitely what Tori was saying, like welcome baskets, like pillows, blankets, sheets, that kind of stuff. It just makes that transition so much easier and more enjoyable. Like you can 100% tell the difference when you give someone like a fresh set of sheets when they come here, as opposed to like, there's a mat, figure it out. It's night and day. So, if we have that at our disposal, it makes the trust and the relationship building from the get-go that much easier.
Yeah, and we just don't have the resources to buy that for everybody. So that, I think, just when you think about when you enter a new apartment, you need a little washcloth, some towels and all that stuff. It goes a long way. Like you're saying.
Our guests also love activities and bingo and having, we have our meals served here, which is great and they're delicious, but just kind of a change is sometimes nice too. New people coming in, bringing different food serving meals. It can just create kind of a difference, break up the routine a little bit. Also, if there's ever like anyone who can come talk to our guests about resume building or interview skills, that could go a long way, because I think, going back to barriers, we have a lot of people who do want to work, but have been out of the workforce for a while. So it can feel really scary to go back into that, and also to even start that resume when they're like, I have this 10-year gap. What do I say about that? And, this doesn't fill up the whole page. That's going to look bad. So there's a lot of anxiety around it too. So if anyone feels like they have a special skill with that, I think our guests would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I will say that like we're always open to ideas as well. So if you're just sitting there thinking maybe they'd be interested in this, give us a call. We'd love to hear what the thought is and if we can make it work.
Wonderful, and definitely want to give a little plug for our upcoming party and auction, which will be Friday, May 19th at Reading Terminal Market. And that auction will also be online as well, with lots of fun things that you can get, and that still all goes directly to our mission that we're hearing about now. So also in terms of something can do, we heard a little bit about kind of some structural things and the issue. What are some steps people could take, or any activities, and maybe anyone else on the chat wants to share to kind of address the overarching structural issues? No, it's a tough question. I know somebody, I was talking about, this panel before this, and somebody had mentioned, pushing for more affordable housing. So making sure our, we have an upcoming mayoral election, and, not pushing for any specific legislation, but just making sure that all of the candidates, and once they get elected, are aware of the need for affordable housing. And then the other issue is, I think we heard a little bit about vouchers, is making sure landlords are taking those. They're legally required to. So, that's something that if you know of any landlords or hear of any, making sure that they're accepting that can help make sure that our guests and residents are housed. So going back to some of the kind of our Bethesda project philosophy and things like that, is sometimes we hear in the news this term harm reduction. And Bethesda project practices a harm reduction model. So I was wondering what does that mean to you, or how do you feel like that kind of plays out at your site?
Yeah, well, I have a pretty specific experience with that, because my program is kind of, like I mentioned, a recovery focused program. And it was, this program started in 2011 or 2012, one of the two. You have to correct me, Tina, if that's not true. Somewhere around there, really close to those dates. But the systems that, we participate in have changed a lot, or drastically, in the last decade plus. And so at the time of this program's beginning, December 2010, I'm gonna remember that next. At the time this program started, it was recovery focused to the point that residents would be penalized, and and to great lengths for using substances, and also required a urine screen at intake. So the harm reduction model, I guess we didn't really explain, is just more so, I guess what in my perception, it's taking away the punitive side of recovery. And kind of taking away like punishment as a way to try to like sort of stop people from using substances, with the understanding that we cannot on our own control whether or not people use substances, but how can we reduce harm by providing a safe environment for them and plentiful resources for them to stop if they want to. And that, that's very broad, but essentially that's how I perceive it to be. And so I'm glad to say that our program has shifted so much since its initiation in this way, because I really think it's a huge flaw in the system if we penalize people for using substances and then they end up back on the streets and back in these cycles that sort of never end. And so this program is, does work in partnership with Project Home, and it's something that's been in conversation constantly. And I think these two programs are both evolving over time, or these agencies are evolving over time. So we no longer require a urine screen for intake at this program, which is a newer thing. And I think that's excellent, because requiring somebody to have a substance use disorder to move into this program, but then while also requiring a clean urine screen is kind of, contradictory, I guess, in a way. So I'm glad to see that we're evolving over time with that, and that we're trying to offer support and encourage sobriety and encourage a sober, healthy living environment here. When people slip or are struggling, we notice that, we take note, we meet with those people regularly, and we try to figure out a solution, while also understanding that it's not up to us at the end of the day, what somebody else does, and we can only offer our support. But we never want to hang housing over individuals' heads for the struggles that they have. So.
Yeah, I mean, she pretty much summed it up. I don't really have a lot else to add. I will say that some of the other housing sites, like the one I worked at previously, North Broad, was not recovery focused. You didn't have to have a substance use disorder. But, there are people there who do. And so, when working with someone who might be struggling, sometimes some of the things we talk about, for example, are like, just having very open, honest conversations. Something that we just asked someone here is like, are you comfortable with your level of use right now? And sometimes people will say, yeah, I'm perfectly happy with the amount I'm drinking or I'm using. And we work with that and say, okay, then how can we make sure, you're not disruptive when you come back here if you've been drinking, or, that you're being safe when you're out, and that the people around you are, not taking advantage of you. What steps can we take to make sure that if you're using drugs, you're using clean needles, and, giving out resources for that. So making sure that we understand where the person is with their use or their recovery, and then working with that to make sure they are safe, while also balancing the safety of the community, because there are other people in the community who are in recovery who do not want to drink or use, and will find it very triggering to be around that. So it does require balancing a lot of different needs.
That's a good point.
I just wanted to say that I think that in some realms, harm reduction is still used as like a taboo term, and something that, might not actually be helpful. And that's not really what we prescribe to at Bethesda Project. But I lost my train of thought. Oh, but it might be taboo, but all humans, engage in somewhat risky behavior, and we come up with ways to make them less risky. So I don't believe it's something that's so revolutionary that it should still be taboo. Like just on a basic level, humans are going to drive cars. We all wear seatbelts. We use, traffic lights. Those are forms of harm reduction. Humans are going to put themselves in somewhat risky situations, but we work with those risks to minimize that.
Thank you. So we heard a little bit about talking with some of the many partners that Bethesda Project has, for example, Project Home. I was wondering if there's any other, organizations or government partners or referrals or anything like that you want to highlight that kind of helps us deliver our services in this larger kind of network of care.
At OBP, we have a lot of partners. We're very fortunate to have a lot of different organizations that actually come on site. We have RHD, the Resources for Human Connections. They have case managers on site, I think 3 or 4 days a week. They do mental health case management. They're not therapists, but they have a psychiatrist that works with them, and they have connections to therapists that we do not have. So our guests who are struggling with mental health, we are able to refer to also work with RHD for case management. And the great thing about those case managers also is that they continue to work with our guests after they leave here. So once someone leaves OBP, the OBP case managers cannot continue to work with them, but their RHD case managers can. which is great, you know, in any case, whether the person has a negative discharge, that they still have that support, or if they're moving into their own place, that can also be very overwhelming. So it's nice to have that support there as well. We also have med students from Jefferson come every Thursday. It's really, really fantastic. They work with our guests, you know, on just addressing their medical needs, like basic medical needs, and then helping them set up appointments and helping them get to their appointments for their more complex medical needs, which can be really nice because some people aren't familiar with the area or maybe aren't ready to get themselves to the doctor, but they come right here. And so there are far fewer barriers for them getting to see those folks.
Yeah, I was going to shout out Phil Abundance for us specifically. You know, they provide us with most of our food on a weekly basis, which is amazing. But another one that people might be interested in is Philly Food Rescue. And I think they run like an app that you could sign up and you yourself go pick up, you know, leftover foods at local restaurants and deliver them to organizations around town. So we also get that weekly, which is just amazing.
Also, shout out to HAP, the Homeless Advocacy Project. They come once every 2 months and do clinics here to help our guests with their legal needs, which is a huge help, especially with like SSI and other income stuff and getting birth certificates and other documents that are not easy to access for folks who are not born in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and since we're not like a shelter, we don't have as much kind of like collaboration with other programs in that way. I guess something I've noticed that we always have, every summer we have occupational therapy interns from Temple. And then, which is an awesome experience, I think, for everybody, because we get a couple more hands on deck and just a little bit more consistent faces that are here for a period of time. And they can kind of like get a little more creative with activities and stuff that maybe sometimes we have time to do. But yeah, actually our main like source of volunteers and activities have been through the same group for I think almost since Bethesda's initiation. It's a group called Saint Mary Magdalene, which is a group of religious folks that come on site and serve meals, and the residents that have, because we do have residents that have lived here since this program started or very close to. So the residents really look forward to them being back on site. They'll actually be here tomorrow, and they actually celebrate everybody's birthday every other month, usually, sometimes every month. So they bring gift cards and they bring cake, and then they bring a big dinner for everybody. So it's a really integral part of how we run here.
And I think that's a nice segue to the next question, with it being National Volunteer Week. And I think, you know, I hate to bring it up, but during COVID, when we had to suspend all of the on-site volunteering, we kind of saw what it would be like if we couldn't have any volunteers on site. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and the impact you see of volunteers and interns, you know, interacting with our guests and residents and even helping behind the scenes during your day-to-day.
So I started during COVID when there were no volunteers. So
Same.
yeah. Did we all? Did you too, Stephen? Okay. So it was like, you know, I wasn't really sure what to expect when volunteers kind of started coming back. But it was, you know, you could see people's faces like light up. And at North Broad, we had breakfast delivered once a month by Road of Shalom. And pre-COVID, the volunteers would come and serve the breakfast, eat with the residents, which they were not able to do. And I would hear people talk about that all the time, how like it was so much fun to have them here and like talk to somebody new and meet somebody. And it felt like a much more engaged community. So you could see like when people kind of started coming back, like everyone was really excited. And some volunteers would come back and do like maintenance work, which people were really excited about. Like, another person I can tell, like I can tell you about this thing that I need fixed. And so you could just see it really makes guests and residents feel seen and, you know, feel connected to the community. It's very exciting to have people coming back.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I was actually shocked how excited the residents were to have some new people on site. And I guess at first I was kind of like, oh, are they gonna really want to play bingo? Are they gonna really want to do this or that? And they do. They want to play bingo and they want to talk to new people and they want candy and soda and lasagna and music and all of it. You know, it's just really important. I think, you know, sometimes we want to balance out, like making sure, at least in my program, that people feel like they live, like they have an independent life, you know. And so I guess that's why I'm always like, well, they're not going to want to do that. Like they're doing their own thing, but they really do. And they get so much out of people coming on site and just, you know, like I said, and you said too, just a different face, just a different perspective, a different person to lend their ear, or whatever that phrase is. I don't know if it's reversed. You guys get it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like volunteers are just a breath of fresh air around here. Like sometimes it gets monotonous, sometimes it gets a little dark. It just happens, you know. There could be 20 guys here in a small building. It gets tough, and when there's new faces and there's new food and there's music and there's light happiness, like it lifts everybody up for an extended amount of time, not just that day.
And there's also things that like I would think about like around holidays, like, oh man, I wish I had time to decorate for St. Patrick's Day or whatever. And then all of a sudden there were people here like putting St. Patrick's Day decorations up. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Like it just does make everything a little bit brighter and cheerier and a little more homey.
Great, thank you. So I guess the last question would be, just what do you love about Bethesda Project? I was wondering if you could highlight if there's any specific, you know, moments that you'll kind of carry with you. What do you find rewarding? Just what do you love about Bethesda Project and why are we so amazing?
I have a moment that comes to mind. We had a guest here who was on the street for decades and often stayed on the street, actually right outside OBP, and was really, really resistant to shelter and just truly not interested. But over several directors' tenure, people would talk to him and try to engage him and, you know, just do whatever he needed to be comfortable, even though he didn't stay here, since he stayed close to here and he felt like part of the community. I would think about 2 years ago, he came to OBP. About a year ago, he almost died from COVID. And then about 2 months ago, he moved out to a different Bethesda site for permanent supportive housing. And we had just like a really nice moment of he did not want us to do anything for his moving out. He was very grumpy about it, but we said, we are still going to give you some attention because we're just really happy he moved into housing. And it just kind of embodied the culture here, the dedication of his case manager who had worked with him and the case managers at the other sites to make him feel comfortable in that transition, because it had taken him so long to get here. Finally got comfortable here and then he moved. You know, everyone put in so much effort. All the staff wanted to say goodbye to him and wish him well. We even there was another guest that was there while we were saying goodbye, just like beaming from ear to ear because he was so happy to see him move on. And it was just a kind of a beautiful embodiment of the work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just like, it's really every person and every individual that comes here is so different, you know, and they have different goals and different dreams, you know. For some people, they come in here to this program and they say, you know, I know this is going to be my last stop, you know, like this is going to be the place that I'm at forever. And there are other people that come in here bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and they're like, okay, what's next? How can you help me get to the next step? And I just love being able to support people in whatever their journey is, and to see it come to fruition for them. You know, I've had the pleasure of helping several people move out with vouchers since I started. And just kind of like that process and kind of watching them kind of transition to that next step. It's very rewarding. And I do think that Bethesda Project specifically has a very person-centered approach. And, you know, we're kind of always thinking about, you know, what is best for the residents and what is best for the overall community of Bethesda Project. And having been working in this field for over a decade at this point, I've seen a lot of different angles. And so I think Bethesda takes on a very human approach to the work that we do. And that maybe sounds like, well, yeah, maybe that seems obvious. Well, it's really not, you know. Some organizations take on more of a business approach, or, you know, or more of a corporate focus even, because there are finances involved, and it does take work to keep the lights on in these types of programs. So, but I think always with Bethesda, it is people first, you know, and I think that speaks very well for Bethesda project. So yeah, there's too many moments to think of something really specific, but every day it's different around here. So
Yeah, every day is definitely different, and it definitely is rewarding, and sometimes it is tiring, but I continue to come back. And I think it is because of the culture that Bethesda has. I think it's the support that I receive, but it's also the support that the guests receive. Say someone quote unquote messes up and they're expecting to be met with this punitive disagreement, you know, a discharge, a negative, a fight, and we meet them with compassion. Like, the look on their face is priceless, you know, like it's just priceless. You know, they get met with compassion for one of the first times in who knows how long, and we give another chance, and we work towards that goal, and we work to change whatever behavior. And that's, in my opinion, how you get things done. That's how you get growth, and that's how you move on to bigger and better things.
Thank you all so much for sharing that, you know, really inspiring words. And thank you everyone on this call, to all of our volunteers for National Volunteer Week, everyone that engages and works with volunteers, whether at Bethesda Project or other great organizations. We just are so appreciative of all your efforts. So we do have a few minutes. Were there any other questions from anyone in the audience, that whether it was something we already touched on, or anything new that you have a burning question about? Feel free to either put it on the chat or take yourself off mute. We do have a comment. What makes Bethesda Project so special is a family of dedicated and caring staff like those on this call, combined with volunteers like you who help us embody our mission of being family. So I think sometimes family can have a little be a loaded term and can mean different things to different people. But I think here, you know, on this call, we really feel that warmth and belonging and sense of home that our staff and our volunteers provide for our guests and residents. Was there any other? Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Once again, it is National Volunteer Week, and we do on Thursday have a fun little social game night at the PHS Pop-Up Garden. I think 5:30 to 7:30 right on South Street. So that'll be a lot of fun, super cash. And then also check out our social media. So Facebook, Instagram, whatever the kids are into, we have some fun different activities going on through there. So once again, thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, all of our staff that work with our guests and residents and volunteers, and then of course our volunteers, and happy National Volunteer Week.